Hello, it's Juho Vepsäläinen. I'm the director of Finland, and we always try to change the format a little bit. So now, because we always have, each session has a theme. This time around, we focus on design systems. And it's a topic I've been working on for a couple of years by now. So before I knew of design systems, I wrote code more like this. So it's called div soup. So you write divs and you add some classes and make it match your mockup that's coming from designer. And then once you're done with the markup and CSS, maybe some JavaScript, then you call it done. But of course, after a while, you notice that it's not a very sustainable way to develop applications or websites. And that's sort of what's changing, or that has been changing during the past couple of years. Just to think about the terms, what's design? So design, it's a very difficult question in the end, but design describes what something is. Like if you consider a pen has some purpose, and its design, I mean, you're supposed to write with a pen. So then you make a pen that you can use for writing. So its design has some purpose. And for web, if you make a website, maybe the design has to be catered for different types of users. So maybe you have like these business users that are always in a hurry. They want to get their thing done fast. And then maybe you have users that don't see so well or have different problems or and so on. And it's always about constraints that force some kind of design. And it's always about some kind of purpose as well for design. And then what are systems? So systems are something that, let's consider like solar system. Why do we call it solar system? It's a system of planets, and planets have different relations. So that's what we consider a system. So when you combine these ideas together, that you have some kind of designs and systems, I think you get design systems. So that's sort of the point. So when you go to this direction, that you start thinking in terms of systems of design, the first step to do, that's quite smart, especially if you don't have a design system in place, is to create some kind of inventory of what you have in the current system. So what you more or less do, you go to your application or site, and then you start making screenshots to capture, let's say, different buttons or different forms, like different elements of the design you have on the site. So what you notice after a while, that maybe you have 10 different buttons, but then when you think from design system perspective, then you can ask yourself, do I need to have 20 different buttons in the system when I could have one that's really well made? That's kind of the things you learn from inventory. So by understanding what you have first, then you start noticing patterns, and these patterns and primitives are going to form your system in the end. One of the funny things about my past is that I started from electronics. So in electronics, what you learn quite fast is different components. So when you do IC design or you do this circuit board, you always think in terms of components. So you have resistors, transistors, and whatever. But it's always these little entities that you use to create some new functionality. And it's similar for the web or for creating applications. And if you think back a couple of years, I think it's especially with solutions like React that we started to think in terms of components in the web. So that's one of the most important things we got with React was the component model. And I believe that's one of the factors that has led to this current day in which we start thinking in terms of design systems, because components, it's a starting point for design system thinking. The way I do my design systems is that I start from primitives. So I think in later sessions, or in my session later today, you will see a couple of primitives I use to construct my user interfaces. So for instance, this can be something like what I call a box. That's the basic primitive, a flex that's encapsulating flexbox. Maybe you have a crate, maybe you have a stack. You have a couple of basic building blocks that you can use to compose patterns. And for patterns, so what's the difference between a primitive and pattern? Well, there's this difference in abstraction in that patterns are something that are more specific to the system, and they have higher level of abstraction. So each pattern is solving a specific problem in the system. And based on this description, you know when to apply the pattern. And patterns are composed of primitives. Sometimes you can compose primitives out of primitives, like flex is made out of box in my system. But patterns are even more specific. And I think it's, as a starting point, it's quite useful to start thinking this way. You could, of course, add your own terms to the mix. What happens often when I develop is that I notice I have primitives, I have patterns, and then I have layouts. So layouts are entire pages that use primitives and patterns to compose their contents. In design systems, we have what we call tokens. And what's a token? A token is like a placeholder for actual value. So let's say we have a token for color that we call primary, and token for color we call secondary. And it's these brand colors that we now know that in my system the primary color is showing kind of is between blue and green. So that's the primary. And then I have secondary that's derived from the primary color. But then I can say that maybe in my site, the header, it needs to have primary background. So tokens give us some kind of language. So the designer can come to the developer and say that that button has to have primary color. And then you understand what you mean. So design systems, they also give you language. So they sit somewhere between designers and developers and lets them work together. So that's one of the key points. I think you will see other types of tokens as well. One common way to deal with tokens is that instead of, let's say, in web development, we deal with paddings and merchants. And in the past, what you might have done is that the designer is going to tell you that this thing has to be a little higher, or it needs more padding, it needs more margin. Then you add some pixels. But in design system thinking, when you go far enough, you say that padding is 1, or padding is 4, or there's a scale. And then you move in the scale. Instead of thinking in absolutes, you think in scales. So that's what I mean. So you have scales going from small to big, and you give it some abstract number. So the number is encapsulating the actual value. And as it happens, it's a valuable property. I can show you from my system later. And as I mentioned, colors, they're a good example of tokens as well. So you can give colors specific names, and then you can go from color name or lookup to an actual color. One important factor is topography. So for the look and feel of the system, the which typefaces you use, where and when, that's quite important. So that's something you can put into your design system. Because in my brand, I have chosen a very specific typeface to use in a very specific manner, and that's what I capture in my setup. And on top of this, you have these guidelines. In a while, I will show you some actual design systems that go quite far in this. But the point is that a design system, it's not a tool just for designers and developers. It's also a tool for even for all the people in the organization. Because what you can do with a good system, you can describe what the brand looks like, what it sounds like, what it looks. It's like many different factors put into one place. And the implication of this is that if you have a company with a strong design system and you get a new employee, you get someone to work in the company, then all they have to do is to look at the system and they understand what the company is actually doing or how they're doing it. I think the examples will make this point clear as well. And as I mentioned, brands leverage style guides and design systems. So for a brand to work, it has to be something you can recognize. And at the same point, brands, they work on different platforms. So you have this intersection between platforms and the brands in such a way that you have to adapt to the platform. So you cannot just design a button once and say it's done. Maybe you want to consider that the button is like this on web platform and it's like this on iOS and like this on Android. So you adapt a little bit to the local environment. So you still have some work to do, but at least now it's in one place. So I think next, I'm going to show you some awesome design systems. And we're going to go through a couple of examples. So you see how these concepts map to practice. So I have the collection here, a couple of really cool ones. And before I even get to this one, I'll show you something that's quite interesting for me as a developer or as a Finn, that Finland has a toolbox. And as it happens, if you go to our site, we use a part of the toolbox. So one of the cool things about the toolbox is that it gave us a font, gave us like a Finnish font. They have a free font called Finlandica. And I just picked it from here because I felt it works for what we're doing. So even if you do some kind of system for yourself, or in this case for Finland, it can have value for others as well. And in a way, it's a way of sharing knowledge and information to other people as well. So, but if you look at this thing, you notice they don't have components. So they have other aspects of design systems. So they have guidelines and they describe a brand. They give you some tools, but then you have to do some work on your own. But still, it was very useful for us. I think they even have icons. There, this what we did, we used this images. So they have a collection of images somewhere. I think I forgot how to find it, but you can find literally a collection of images to use in your designs based on the system. And then you have Adobe, a very big company doing many applications. For them, the challenge is like when you have 20 or more, I don't even know how many applications they have, but they have a lot. And the point is, how do I make how consistent with each other? And because I have a lot of developers doing this work, and that's maybe one of the reasons why they did the design system. And in this design system, they describe, let's say I went to work for Adobe, so then I will go to the design system and I will start reading. So they have they follow certain principles in their design. They do for all platforms, for everyone, and it has to be evolving and transparent, built by community. So you can very well see what even the values are. So it's it's quite interesting. And here we get back to design tokens. So we can see what they consider a token in the system. So you see, that's like the technical presentation is the hex value. On top of that, we say it's below 400. But we can say, we can be more specific. We can say call to action background color, button call to action background color. So we can build on top of this technical definitions and make them more concrete. So here they explain how they do this, but you can always choose the level of abstraction you prefer. That's another interesting one. So they have a token for size. So size is wrapping these pixel values on different platforms. They have even different scales for different platforms. So for desktop and for mobile, they have different mapping. And then, yeah, but that's like, it's a lot of detail that's telling you how do I use this system? How do I develop using this system? Principles, like here they give colors names. One interesting thing about colors is that if you want to see more colors, all you have to do is to learn more names of colors. So that's another factor, is that when you know the names of the colors, then it's easier to discuss as well. And here is the topography as I had in the presentation. Object styles, it's a lot. And then eventually we get to application layout. Like how do I do layout on Adobe side? Even content is described. So they describe how should I write about the product. How do I write about the products? In which way? That's very useful if you're doing writing for them. And I think you can put a lot of this information even in tools. And then we get to this portion that's close to React, which is components. So they describe, like, what's a button? Button is something with a label. It has different options, like label, call to action variant, primary variant. So these are all the different, we see different versions of the button. So, and then we explain in which situation we use different buttons. So it's really capturing a lot of information about the system. It's valuable because now, instead of having 20 different buttons, we don't know why they exist or why they're like that. We have all the button information in one place. So that's good to have. But you see, it goes on and on. So it's really capturing primitives and patterns that are useful in the system. I think, I mean, that's a really good example, but I think we can check out some other one. So of course, they have Apple has guidelines, but I think Atlassian was cool, and then there was something else. Yeah, this one. So you see, this is the Atlassian system. So here, they very clearly divide the components and patterns. And related to this, maybe you have seen something like a chakra before. So here we have a system of components. So it's a lot of different components. But if you look at the design, it's here is where we get to this discussion. What's a design system and what's not? And I will say it's not a design system by itself. It's more like a system of components or a collection of components, because it's this, like, the level of abstraction is not specific enough. But I would say something like this, like Chakra, it's a great starting point for your own design system, because you can literally go and use their primitives, and then maybe you wrap these primitives as your own, and then you build your own patterns. So you use the primitives to construct your own work. So in Atlassian's case, they have these components, like which I will call primitives in my terms. And here, what's interesting is that so we have concrete examples. You have actual code. You can see what kind of props they accept, and then you have the usage. So again, it's a lot of information. But so we have components, and then you have patterns, and you see they have less patterns than components. But these patterns are meant for specific problems, as I mentioned. So now they say that you can use this media picker, which is quite complex. There's a lot of functionality. You can use it in these cases when you have to select and add files to applications. And it's useful to capture these patterns in sense that, like in a client project, what we noticed is that we had this similar pattern that was quite complex. So let's say it was something like a file selector. So we were navigating a file tree in the web, and then one day the client was that, yeah, we have this other view, and we need to do file selector as well there. And then it started feeling that, yeah, we have a pattern. So we did one-off implementation first, and then later on we found out that what we have, it should be a pattern. So we extracted it as a pattern. So that's like one way to develop, is that you build something out of primitives, and then one day you notice that what we built, it's a pattern. So like, let's extract the pattern, define its use, start using the pattern in other parts of the system. So that's like one way to develop these things. Actually, maybe I show you what I did. I mean, it's still work in progress, but I'm doing my own design system. It's more like a component system still. It doesn't have enough for me to call it a full design system, but it's a start. So here I'm showing it because you see my thinking and the terms and how they repeat. So here I have a scale for spacing. So I have some number maps to some value. You see what is here. Then you have colors. You have different oranges and blues and whatever. You have primary, secondary color, action color, and so. And then what I find quite important as a developer is that you always have this example source that maybe you can modify a little bit. So, I mean, I can just I can literally code in browser a little bit. I can try out different things, what it looks like on different values. And what I did in the past was simply to develop the thing I need here, and then copy the code and use that, because I can literally see what it's going to look like. And then I did this extraction. So it's useful to know that this thing has these capabilities, and that's how I can use it. So you see boxes, buttons, flex, heading. It's a lot of different primitives, and then I have patterns that I built on top of the primitives. So I mean, for instance, I show different variants of alerts. So because I need different alerts, then I show what it's going to look like on different variant. But that's I think I will discuss this system I built in more detail later in my other session. Because they'll have a look at a couple of systems to see how they're similar, how they're different, because that's how you learn. So it's the Salesforce system. They describe well how to get started with the system, what you need to do, what platforms we support, or so. Then interesting thing, design guidelines. Like, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do specific things with the system? For accessibility, we have overview, guidelines, patterns. It's really, you see that design system is capturing a lot of information. And then at some point we get back to the component. So here again, we see alert. So that's an alert. And it has these accessibility features. And then here, what I had in my system, they have as well. So you have, they call it variations, I call them variants, which is the same thing. So warning would look like that, and error that. So communicate different variants. and then you tell. It's quite technical, and what's cool what they did is this change log. So because it's useful to know if you have some kind of versioning in the system, it's useful to know what changed in what version. So maybe that's good information to have in the system as well, at least for developers. So I think there's a lot to learn from just by going through this list. What you will find is that the valuable ideas in a lot of them, and sometimes they only do like small subset of what they can. It's really a lot of work to build a design system. So the best thing to do is to get started and like start making things more structured. So I can say that there's some cost to doing this. It's not free, but at the same point, you're capturing this information that's otherwise implicit in the system. Let's see what they have. So they have accessibility guidelines. They have something about colors. Yeah, you see they're very specific about naming colors. And they're using SAS. Well, yeah. And here they tell about writing. Like, how do I write? That's like one thing. You can have a component, you can have something in the system, then you have a way that you kind of communicate with the user. So it's a good thing that you have a consistent way of doing that. Like here they say you do this instead of that. So no active start record for like this cluster instead of this more complicated one. It's very active sounding system. But yeah, then we get back to these components. It's like everyone has to write their own button component, but yeah, that's kind of cool. So you see demo, JS, HTML, snippet, and props. So you see it takes all of these things. So it looks very, very good. There was something else that's interesting. Maybe actually show you. There's this. So you have Storybook for React. You have Storybook. So if you get into tools and you don't want to write your own, I think Storybook is the most popular one. Then I mean it has plugin system. It's quite powerful. My understanding is that you get into trouble if you have a lot of components, but it's improving all the time. Another one is React Style Guide. It's a little faster. It's more, let's say, it has more opinions, but it's a good option. It's cool because you can write Markdown and you can describe. You can have description in Markdown, example in Markdown next to your component. Yeah, but it's something to look into. But then in my case, I'm actually writing my own system from scratch, so that's one way to do it. But it's those are the most popular ones. But actually, now that I think of it, it's interesting to notice that all of the systems we have been looking at so far, I think all of these companies, they did their own setup. So instead of using Style Guide or Storybook, they wrote their own. I don't know. But yeah, so just to recap, I think there's a lot of value in like understanding this. So if we go back, I mean, once you start doing things in a more structured way, you don't want to go back to this. You don't want to go back to div soup. So then I would say it's worth investing some time to thinking about how can I do this better? I mean, there's investment in learning to learn to compose out of primitives. Or first to create primitives you need, and then use primitives. And I guess the last point I want to make is that what changed or like opened the topic for me was looking up something like Team UI, because Team UI it's really giving you the starting point. So it has its basic primitives, there's box and flex and everything that you need. It's quite cool in sense that it provides enough flexibility, so you can still use the system, but you can go around the system. So if you need to do something specific, you can still do it, and it's teamable, and it has this variance. So it has everything you need to make a really cool system on top of React. So, I mean, if I didn't know anything about design systems yet, I would likely look at Team UI first and start doing something simple on top of that. There's also Rebus and many others. I mean, Chakra will be like the one option. I don't know this well enough, but I know that I think it's using Team UI under the hood. So it's Team UI, but with more opinions. Rebus might be another one. So you start getting these options. So instead of having to write everything out of scratch, you could start with one of these. But I think you will learn more about the topic in today's session. And I hope this gave you some kind of overview of what we're looking at when we're speaking about design systems. So I think that's it for me. And I hope you enjoy today's presentations.